just try to add it into there on my slideshow, just a picture of like the stereotypical like mascot. Because then it talks about like the whole contemporary identity.
Right.
So I was going to mention it, but I think it's better to visual it too.
Take two. My mask got tangled into my earring there. Welcome to Door Community Auditorium and welcome to the Door County Talk series. I'm Carrie Lewis, Executive Director of DCA, and I thank all of you here in person as well as those watching from home on our live stream. Before we get started, we want to thank our partners and sponsors. We're grateful for the partnership of University of Wisconsin Green Bay's First Nations program and Dr. Lisa Poupart, who recommended the slate of speakers for this year's series. We're also appreciative of the support of the Door County Civility Project, and live streaming for the series is sponsored by Jim and Kathleen Steele. Please join me in giving all of these partners a round of applause. We hope to see all of you back here on March 5th for the third talk in the series, which will explore Menominee culture. At this time, please take a moment to silence all mobile devices, and I'll talk briefly about this morning's format. Our speakers will speak for about 40 to 50 minutes, then we'll take a 10-minute break. When we come back, Mark Nelson from Door County Civility Project will say just a few words about that organization. Then our speakers will come back, present their closing segment, and take our questions. For those of you live streaming, you'll have the opportunity to send your questions as well, and we'd encourage you to either post them in the comments or send a direct message to DCA's inbox. Due to a last-minute family emergency, Joe Daniels was unable to join us this morning. However, we're very happy that Starla Thompson is with us and was able to bring along Autry Johnson, her nephew, and Joe's grandson. I'll let them introduce themselves to you. Please welcome Starla Thompson and Audrey Johnson.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bonjour, Mano Gijagud. Waban Gijakwe knows one, Gade de Nadodam, Stone Lake Ndonjaba, Elsie Johnson Nokomis, Pottawatomie and Dow. So my English name is Starla Thompson. My spirit name is Waban Gijakwe. It was provided to me by Joe Daniels Sr., my uncle. He translated it into the first light that breaks the night woman. And I come from Forest County. My grandmother was Elsie Johnson from Stone Lake, specifically in Forest County, if you know where that is. And I'm of the Otter clan. So that's my matriarchal line. But my father was Santa Ynez Chumash around the Santa Barbara area in California. So that's a little bit about my lineage.
But just to check, can everybody hear this? Okay. Bonjour, mahishka kanijinga dijnikas, bude wadmi mine okakadal, gno do dem ishka gyokne wichpia. Hello, my English name is Autry. My spirit name is Mahishka kanijinga, which comes from the Ho-Chunk language. It means one who stands on a white cloud. I am from Forest County, Pottawatomie, and my mother is from Ho-Chunk tribe here in Wisconsin. I am of the Eagle clan, and I am originally from Stone Lake, Wisconsin, which is the reservation of our tribe. Currently, I live in San Juan, Puerto Rico, doing research on international law and sovereignty. And I wanted to say thank you to everybody for allowing me to come in last minute. I am sorry that my grandfather couldn't make it, but I am honored that he was asked me to step in for him, which puts me at a way of him trusting me in order to educate everybody about our tribe. So thank you.
Yes, and Chimikwech to our audience, thank you for coming and convening around community, and thank you to the Door Community Auditorium for allowing us to have this conversation. I would like if it took that format of a conversation, some dialogue. So I have a question for you. Is our audience mostly, I take it, locals? Yeah. Yes, okay. Long-term locals, so I'm sure you have your own history, right? Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I'll start, and I'll share a little bit more about my history because I think that's important about why I do the work that I do. So my grandmother, Elsie Johnson, that I mentioned earlier, is what we call a boarding school survivor. And I'm sure many in this audience have heard about the boarding schools in this country. In Canada, they were called the residential schools, right? And so my grandmother Elsie's boarding school was really close, right up the road in Lac du Flambeau. And if you've seen, they've what would you call it?
They reconstructed?
Yeah, the boarding school.
Or they remodeled, you can call it.
No, there's another, restored? I'm looking for another word. But they brought it back, and so you can actually see what it looked like at that time. So if you have a chance to go that way. So my grandmother had that boarding school experience. And I don't know if there's anyone in this room that doesn't know about it. I'm sure you can ask me questions later about it. But it was during the assimilation period in our country's history with Native American people. And so this was a large tool in assimilating Native people. So coming out of that, that's just 2 generations prior to me, right? My mother was born in 1959 here in Wisconsin to her people, the Pottawatomie. And as an infant, she contracted tuberculosis. And so in that day, when you got tuberculosis, they would put you in a sanatorium. So my mother was in a sanatorium for the first 2 years of her life. And back then, you know, now we are so much more educated. We have these precautions. We're all masked up, right, vaccinated. But they just didn't touch you. And you were just kind of, you know, shunned from the rest of society. So she spent the first 2 years of her life never being touched, hugged. Her relatives were not able to visit her. But as time went on, every once in a while, my aunt said that she was able to come and visit my mother. And at one visit, she went and visited my mother, and she said she was there in the sanatorium in a metal crib. And when it was time to leave, the 2 sisters became really emotional and you know, crying and screaming and wailing. And they said, you know, my mom has a nickname, Cha-Cha. Cha-Cha, we'll be back, you know, we'll be back soon, don't worry. And when they returned, my mother was gone. And she had been illegally adopted, essentially stolen, right? So, and removed from her, completely severing her tie to her people here in Wisconsin, taking out west to Nevada. So when I think about my grandmother and my mother and even my own story, I see policy and the way we deal with Native populations. There's history repeating but taking different forms, right? And in that time, the adoptions that were happening in this country with Native children were really problematic. And so that's why the Indian Child Welfare Act came out of that, because of things like that, because of my mother's adoption. So my mother was raised without any form of love, empathy. She was raised with extreme abuse, and it's something my family can't even really speak about, that level of abuse. And so as soon as she could, she got out of there, right? Took off and found her way back to the Midwest, to Chicago, where her father lived. And so all of these things play into my journey, right? And she was lost in many ways, and she became, I'm her oldest daughter. She has three children, and she had me pretty young, I think around the age of 18 in Chicago. And so all of these things I know play into who I am and my story, and even my children's story. I have 4 boys myself, right? All boys, no girls. You know, the passion that I have for my community, sharing in this way that I am with you today, I'm just so grateful for the opportunity, because I think it allows for us to really have dialogue and perhaps change what has taken place, right, and have a new history. So that's a little bit about my family's story. So I work independently. I did work for my tribe for some time as an educator, and I created a leadership program for young adults like Autry coming out of college or just wanting to get some work experience. So I did work with my tribe for quite a while. But now I'm an independent consultant. So what does that mean? Like, I'm sure you've heard people say that, right? I will consult with different organizations, be it the Chicago Blackhawks, right, who we know visibly has like a Native mascot. And, or an environmental firm that doesn't understand why they can't dig at a particular sacred site or gravesite, a Native American gravesite, right? So I think it's really important to make these relationships like we're doing today, because if we can't come together and convene and have dialogue, then neither of us are going to get anywhere. So that's how I see myself. And Audrey and I both know there's a teaching about a beaver woman, and she lived between two worlds, between the animal world and the human world, and she was able to speak for both. And she was really important. And I think we have a lot of roles like that in Native American culture, and that are really about, you know, what is needed at that time. So I'm really grateful to be able to be here and share that with you. So that's just a little bit about me. Okay? I would like to kind of set the stage for what we'll do today with a land acknowledgement that I wrote. So I'll start with that. Okay. So first I'd like to say that a land acknowledgement, has everyone been hearing about how people are doing land acknowledgements? You have, okay. And what are your thoughts about it? I mean, does anyone have any thoughts about them? Have you heard them? Yeah, right, okay. So first and foremost, I want to say that a land acknowledgement, I think the format that we're seeing it in is organizations or governments, right, are saying, okay, yes, we're acknowledging the indigenous people who are here. But I think we all know that, right? That's nothing new. We all are pretty educated about that. But what I'd like to share with this group is that land acknowledgement is really an indigenous way of life. So we were never separated from the natural world. And we know that without the natural world, we cease to exist. So when we rose in the morning, we had a prayer, right? When we were near water, we had a prayer, a ceremony. So land acknowledgement, that reverence for land is something that we've done for time immemorial. So I would just like to start with that. I think it reframes it a bit differently, right? So land acknowledgement is an indigenous way practiced for time immemorial. The introduction I provided you is an integral part of the oral tradition which keeps and protects our culture and history as Native people. This history tells us that we're the Anishinaabe, or the original people. And so as the original stewards of the land, we are taught that land is sacred and that we have a sacred responsibility in relationship with land. And as I said, as creator's last creation, we know that we are the most pitiful of those beings. And we understand that we need all orders of life for survival, including land, because land is a source of clan, food, medicine, plants, sacred spaces. Our homelands, which includes Door County, Wisconsin, and the Great Lakes region, hold a deep connection to Creator. This connection provides lessons for sustaining that sacred relationship and roadmap for living in accordance with all of creation. And so within our discussion today, I would like to acknowledge that the lands in which we live, learn, and work are the traditional homelands to the Bad River, Lake Superior Chippewa, the Ho-Chunk Nation, the Coudray Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, the Lac du Flambeau, Lake Superior Chippewa, the Menominee Tribe of Wisconsin, the Oneida Nation, the Forest County Pottawatomie, the Red Lake Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, the St. Croix Chippewa, the Soquequan Band of Chippewa, Stockbridge-Munsee Nation, and also the Brothertown Indian Nation, along with other nations which were forcibly removed. Go ahead.
So I wanted to add something in. Thank you for listening to my aunt. I think she's giving a really good introduction of what land acknowledgement is. But she is giving a very good historical analysis as well as an introduction for what Native people are doing in today's world. But I wanted to say that I will be touching more on how this reflects on not only Pottawatomie culture, but specifically indigenous culture and what it means to be connected to land, animals, and to other humans. So I'll go more into that explanation, but I just wanted to say that it is relevant for not only us as a people, but for all people, regardless of their ethnic backgrounds. So thank you.
Absolutely. So as I was saying, there's many nations we know were forcibly removed. So the fact that indigenous people have remained sustain, and continue to act as stewards is a remarkable act of perseverance. So it is with gratitude and intentionality that we honor the relationship that Indigenous people have with the land, and not just with our words, right, but in action. Therefore, I invite everyone here to stand alongside Indigenous people as caretakers of Mother Earth for the benefit of our future generations. Miigwech. Okay, so as I mentioned in the land acknowledgement, we are the Pottawatomie, or Anishinaabe. This translates to original people. Our creation stories tell us that we are the original man, and the Great Lakes area is our home. Many of us learned in school that we migrated here over a land bridge, right? But as more proof is coming out, we're finding out that's just not true. If anyone heard about the footprints that were found at White Sands in New Mexico, right? That's like dated at 23,000 years ago. So this is we didn't need the evidence. We knew. We had our creation stories to tell us this, right? And so at one time, the Pottawatomie were part of a larger group of individuals, which are the Three Fires Confederacy. And this included the Ojibwe and their keeper of the faith. And even in their name is the word Jabam, which means spirit. Ottawa, our brothers, were keeper of the trade. And Pottawatomie are the youngest of the three brothers, and we're keeper of the fire. And so my nephew here will talk more about that story, but really it's important to know that we already know that fire is life. There's a spirit, it's a living spirit, right? It was the first thing that allowed man to even have life. So that's a bit about the Three Fires Confederacy. And if you look, I'm sure you've seen our tribal insignia. The three feathers that hang are a nod to that brotherhood because we still honor that today. So that's the Forest County Pottawatomie. Forest County Pottawatomie is the only, as I just said, the Great Lakes is home for us, right? This is what our stories tell us. Yet there's only one band in Wisconsin. So, I mean, who can take a guess at why that is? Absolutely, right? Removal. And so, you know, it's dark history, but it's something I think we need to talk about. So, because it sets the stage of what I will talk about in Door County, and then also later when I talk about Chief Simon Kokwatos. So during removal time, Andrew Jackson, we know, signed the Removal Act in 1830, essentially saying that any Native American living east of the Mississippi was to be forcibly removed, right? The removal time also coincided with a treaty period where they were getting a lot of nations to sign treaties in order to acquire the lands, right? And so why is this happening? As we know, the first settlements in this country were, you know, Jamestown, Boston, Philadelphia, right? So the eastern seaboard is just getting flooded. And as that's happening, we're seeing more and more foreigners come in through here, through Wisconsin. And, you know, everything that I was reading was this is not where they were landing. They were landing on the eastern and then heading this way. No one was coming directly here. So this led to manifest destiny, right? So this American sentiment that we all are destined for capitalism and religion, and that, you know, under this guise that we can do, all of these are acceptable, right? And so Indian Territory, as you know, or you might not know, was out west in Oklahoma and Kansas. So that's why you see Pottawatomie bands out that way, because they were effectively removed there. So this led to, there was sometimes in the treaties, certain time periods they gave nations to gather their belongings or get themselves together and get ready to leave, right? But in reading the land acknowledgement I just did, you might imagine how difficult that could have been for Native people, where this is their creation stories tell them we're from here, this is home. We don't own the land, we're of the land. We are Creator's most pitiful beings, right? So we have this reverence and gratitude for everything around us. This was a difficult concept for Native people to understand. And so here you're seeing these two worlds clash. And that's why they didn't want to leave, right? And our sacred sites, our relatives are still there. And so you'll see throughout the country forced removals like this, which happened with us in 1838, where a band of Pottawatomie that were in Indiana were removed 4 states away, over 660 miles, right? And so their concern was not for, I mean, this was a militarized removal. For our safety, our concern, water, food was not a concern. And so we lost many of our relatives during removal time because of this. Did we resist removal? Well, absolutely, right? It's like being separated from your child, being separated from one of my boys. And so the way the Pottawatomie did, and others, was they hid in the woods of Wisconsin and effectively became squatters on our own homeland, right? Our own ancestral lands. Our band, the Forest County Pottawatomie, are direct descendants of those strolling Pottawatomie, right? So, and that was in order to maintain our traditional way of life. So I want to say something. This is my first time in Door County. It's beautiful from what I could see underneath all the ice. I need to come in the summer. And this is my nephew as well, so thank you for being gracious host. But when I was researching this, and I have to explain my expertise, I'm a research fellow out of the University of Chicago. My expertise is in Chicago. It's where I was born and raised. I kind of shared that with you. And there's a lot of things, even about a place like Chicago, that nobody knows. I'm sure you've heard of all the talk about DuSable, Jean-Baptiste DuSable. He's a Haitian man. They've now credited him recently, I'd say about the last 30 years, with being the founder of Chicago, right? People were crediting other people. The Kinseys was a huge name for a long time. His wife was a Pottawatomie woman named Kitty Hawa. So that's my work in Chicago, is establishing her claim as the First Lady of Chicago and telling her story. So I just want to lead that, Door County is not my specialty, but as I was researching it, I found it fascinating. There is such rich history here and such different accounts of what happened, because I went to my nation, my tribe, and I asked for our records, but then what is available, that you might be able to find in academia and otherwise, right? I was reading that as well. I like to have both sides of telling a story because that's what it is, right? It's telling a story. And I think we already know that the people that are able to tell that story usually are what are conquerors, right? So Door County, this is what I learned about Door County. Well, first, I'll start with what my uncle told Autry and I the other day. We're at the Field Museum looking at some really medicine items. I guess that's the only way I can explain it to you. Spiritual items, very sensitive items that the field has down in their basement under lock and key. And when we were sitting there, he said something, and I know this was in preparation for being here today with you. We brought out a drum, and he said, that is directly from Door County. And Door County is the epicenter of our medicine lodge and our teachings. And I just kind of got the chills because I knew we would be here. And then it became really evident to me how important this place was to our ancestors, right? And why they wouldn't want to leave here. So the first contact was, we know the French were huge in this area, right? Fur trading was with the French explorers and the Jesuit priests. So I read all about that. I read about the relations between the Pottawatomie and them, which seemed pretty copacetic for the most part. And then as we get into the Revolutionary War, I'm starting to see Pottawatomie move into this really diplomat role, right? And they almost seem like guardians of Door County. And even in positioning where they were right at the, coming into Door County, that they really felt this sense of like pride. This is some place that we need to protect and preserve. And I thought that was really unique because you did have the Menominee here, you had the Winnebago, the Ojibwe were here as well. And so I found that interesting. Chief Simon Kokwato says that we were here for at least 600 years from his recollection, right? And what he knows from his ancestors. I learned about this huge trade center at Rock Island in that time. I thought was really interesting. And that they credit the first non-native settlement to Jacques Vieux. He knows French. In 1796, right? And so then we were talking with one of our other relatives last night, and he said, well, you have to make sure to mention death's door. Does everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say that? Okay. So pre-1835, it sounds like it got that name because of the shipwrecks, right? And it really sounds like a dangerous area to try to navigate, but the only way you could get to Green Bay at the time. So it seemed like it got its name, but then there's another element to that. The Winnebago and the Pottawatomie had battled it out. Were trying to battle it out at one point there, and they had warriors on both sides that were killed in birch bark canoes in trying to navigate that space. So that was most interesting to find out. Okay, so in July of 1848, Jacques Vieux's son, Andrew Vieux, here he is. I imagine he's spending all this time in Door County. His father, I found out, was married to a Pottawatomie woman. Jacques was a huge Indian trader in the area, right? So I'm thinking he had pretty good relations, right? But here his son they buy 2 tracts of land, 40 acres each, in this area, and they give the deed to these men, the Pottawatomie men, leaders at that time, right? And they named them all. I think there was like 7 or 8 different leaders. At our village called Black Earth Village. Have you heard of that name before? No? Okay, right. So, and I've heard it called different things, like we called it planting soil or planting ground because it was so rich and ripe for that. And so Black Earth Village is the birthplace of Simon Kukwatos, who I'll talk about a bit. So, that's the planting grounds that I alluded to. So here they are. They have these 2 tracts of land. I'm sure they're thinking that, feeling really relieved that here removal's happening, yet they're still here, and then they get this land. In a short time, what is this? Just a short time later. What I read was that there was a lot of jealousy around that land, that they had that land because it was so rich and fertile. And so they started to demand that their tax deeds were put on that land. Well, we don't know about paying taxes, right? That's about as foreign as it gets. I think it's still foreign to all of us. So they are able to take that land from them, that land that they were just gifted, right, from the relationship with this family, and force a removal, which was really sad to kind of read that. That's difficult history, right? So this is all during the time, and this is the environment that Simon Kukwatos would have grew up in. So his spirit name was Kakanasiga. It means bright light. Simon said that he was Chief Anagisi's direct descendant, which that's at least would have had to have been his great-great-grandfather, right? So if that chief was around in 1679, and we only know it, right? I feel like there's only references to natives in history when it's also tied to like an explorer or something of that nature. We know that he saved Robert LaSalle at Rock Island, who he found starving. At least that's what the story is, right? And so this was a point of pride for Simon Kukwatos. I'm that descendant of that chief, right? I'm on a long line of chiefs, really, when I started to do the lineage. So he's born on May 18th, 1851, like I said, at the planting grounds of Black Earth Village, Pottawatomie Village, in Kewaunee County. And so, Kewaunee, does anyone know what that means? Have you heard about what that means in Pottawatomie? So it translates to Kewaunee, which means I'm lost. which I think probably happened pretty regularly around this time, right? His father was a Negumsa, shimmering light. His father died very young in his childhood. He's only 5 years old, right? And so he's coming into this time where it's a really chaotic time in our history for Native and non-Native people. And he's raised by his grandfather, which I actually think is a saving grace, because his grandfather is really a presence within the tribe, within his community. He's a peaceful man. They say he's a peaceful chief. He knew that he needed to do what we're doing today, right? To convene around community and to make these relationships in order for his people to live and stay and have a life. He refused to sign the treaties, you know? So I think that speaks to his character. And he lived to like 110 years old. And I don't know about you, but everything I read about that time period, I thought people were like dying at like 45 years old, right? If you watch the movies. But the more and more that me and my nephew researched, 114, 110, it kind of blew us away. At least the indigenous people were living that long. You know, so what does that say about these two worlds as well? So age 13, you know, they're not able, the land deeds are up. They've thrown them off their lands. They've done the whole tax deed thing. They can't stay. So Simon's forced to leave with his band at Gowani, and go to UP in Michigan. And he stays there for the rest of his life, really, in that area. Bark River, Michigan, it was where the Wooster roll, if you know what that is. So all these bands of Pottawatomie that resisted removal, finally the government said, okay, take a tally of them, send down an agent, take a tally of them. And it's called the Wooster roll. And so that's when they started really understanding who was here. In Forest County, it was around 700 tribal members, right, or members. So he's recorded on that roll up in Bark River, Michigan. As he gets older, he never goes to school, and he becomes a timber cruiser, which I didn't know what that meant, so I had to look that up. But apparently it's kind of like a surveyor, right? And looking at the land and seeing like what, unless someone has another thought, but you know, the trees for the logging and seeing what's in the area, what's growing, what's not, what would be a good area. And so this is his life. You know, he's removed from his homeland. He's up over, if you've been near Hannonville, where those Pottawatomie are, and they have a reservation there now, he's in that area. But this was always home. This was always home. And so as soon as he can, he comes back to the area, right? And so we kind of see him surface, and well, this is later in his life. We know this about him, that he is the one that advocated for that totem pole, which I think is so strange. We're not Pacific Northwest Native people, but we have a totem pole here in Door County. It's so funny. And then in Chicago, they are just fascinated with Plains Indians. And it's like everywhere. That's all Anishinaabe country, right? So, okay. So he worked really hard at getting recognition for his people, and that this was Pottawatomie land, right? And for their rights. Chief Simon passed away in 1930 in Blackwell, which is not far from here, near our reservation. And yet he didn't have his funeral service you see there, months later. It was here at Peninsula State Park. You should know that this was his dying wish. You know, when he passed, he didn't have much, but he said, that's all I want, is I want to be back with my relatives, Chiefs Anagasi, in Door County. That's where I belong. And so that was his dying wish, and they honored that wish. And I don't know if you've heard about it or seen the videos. 15,000 people, they said, non-Native people came and saw that service. And that's not including the Native people that were there. So it was a huge event. And here he is. He has all his regalia on. They talked about this code. Apparently he talked a lot with the Wisconsin Historical Society, but this is a beaded soldier's coat. And they're not sure how he got that, but they know that he went to Washington, D.C. and also Madison quite frequently, so they think in one of those trips, perhaps, one of these soldiers gifted it to him. And he was very prideful in wearing that, right? And you can kind of see it in his face there. So, okay, so I just want to talk a bit, I want to talk a bit about who he was as a person. So I noticed like the Western construct of all of this and what was happening in our country, you know, it was really convenient for us to call someone a chief. Here, chief, sign here on this treaty. Great, done, right? I noticed as I research, even when I'm researching, her name's Kitty Howell, the First Lady of Chicago that I'm doing my research on, everyone wants to call her a princess. And I think that's like a Western construct, right? You only have value when you have status. That's how you have value. Well, that doesn't take much. It just requires you to be born, you know? But I want to talk more about who I feel like he was, and you can see through his actions. He was a leader. He knew all the Algonquin languages. He knew Ojibwe and Pottawatomie, and he knew English, and he was a linguist. For him to read and write at that time without ever having formal education is very impressive. He was a diplomat, and I think he took on that role, and my nephew will talk a little bit more about that. What we see ourselves as liaisons and diplomats, that's a role we still hold today. But I think he saw the presence of his grandfather as a peaceful man and all those chiefs after him that were diplomats and said, that's who I am, that's who I have to be for my people. He was a diplomat. He was an educator. He loved to write letters. I mean, they know about everything he did because he just wrote to everyone that would listen on behalf of his people. So he was an advocate. He often wrote to Washington, D.C. And, you know, when he asked for things, it wasn't for things for himself, material things. He was asking, I need to find a way to get to D.C. I need a way to get the ear of, you know, they had weird ways of relating to the Great Father, right, to D.C., to talk about my people and share their condition in Wisconsin. He loved to speak. He was a speaker and did any chance that he could get, he would speak. And so in the sentiment of his grandfather, Chief Quitos, he says this quote, "Those that do not listen will die. Do not quarrel or scold one another. We must not hate each other. We must love all the world." So it just really shows that how he took that on, that peacekeeper role, and who he was. And so this is how I like to think of Simon. So in Pottawatomie, at our tribe, it's debated about, you know, whether he was a chief or not, and I'm just going to be really candid, right? We know a lot of time these labels were put on us. We'll have him speak for everybody. Oh, he knows English. He could speak for everybody. But that's not really what our culture and our tradition teaches us. We say that there's leaders for different times and for different reasons. And when that time comes, that person steps up. And then that time's over and they step down, right? And then someone else steps up. That was more in line with our culture. So I honor him in that way, but also I like to think about his character and what he did for his people more than anything else. So out of the sacrifices that people like Chief Simon made and his grandfather, Aganasi, Quitos, and others that, you know, resisted removal, wanted to stay here in our homeland, provided for what we have today. And so this is a picture from our new community center. Has anyone been up there? Have you seen about it, heard about it? State of the art? Okay, it's gorgeous. I myself just went last weekend. Currently, we have approximately 1,800 tribal members. We are, in compared to other nations, other bands, that's a pretty small number, right? But yet, as I've shared, we were the strolling Pottawatomie. We were the ones who fought. And sometimes we paid the highest price. You know, many of our ancestors left during that time. So we have 100% high school graduation rate that we're really proud of. Education is a huge focus for our tribe. We are the largest employer in Forest County, and as well as Milwaukee. So I'm sure you all know about the casino in Milwaukee, right? Okay. Does anyone know why that's there? or how that happened? Have many of you been here 30, 40 years? Okay. So Forest County used to be arguably one of the poorest nations in the country. There wasn't running water. There was outhouses. There was trailers. Families were using trailers as homesteads. And down in Milwaukee, something else was brewing. There was, because of relocation, that was another period in our country, in policy time, a relocation, right? So still yet the natives are not assimilating fast enough. Okay, let's add an incentive. Send them all to the cities and tell them we'll get them a place for their family and they'll have a job. So here we did. We all left our reservation communities, or a lot of us did, and rushed into places like Minnesota, Minneapolis, and Chicago, right? Showed up, and many times there was no job, and the housing that was provided was not something any of us would want to be in, right? Or certainly have our families in. And so we have a huge population in Milwaukee that are there now, and as they're there, their children, they're finding that many of the other people in Milwaukee have never encountered Native people. And so their children are being racially profiled, they're having acts of violence happen toward them. And so these mothers, this group of mothers, 3 or 4 mothers, can't believe here we are after all this time, and we're still going through this, and our children are still unsafe. And so they thought of the ideal, the concept of the Indian Community School. And they said, this will be a place, you can't undo what boarding schools did, but this will be a place where they can learn their language on a daily basis. Everything that we teach our children will be founded out of our cultural beliefs and our traditions. And so they started it up in one of their kitchens. And then word got out, and they just kept getting more and more children. Obviously, the experience that their children were having was an experience that was happening with other families as well. But they kept losing, that would only go so far. You have to feed the children, you have to have supplies. And so they were looking for funding and a way to fund that school into perpetuity. But first to have a safe school, a safe building. And so we moved around quite a bit in those first few years. And finally they said, no, we have to find a permanent solution. So they had determined there was a tract of land in the Menominee Valley in Milwaukee, and it was called Indian land. And it was slated as such, federal land. And so they approached all the tribes in the area and said, would you perhaps partner with us? This is important. This is important for all of our children, because it was going to be a school for all Native American children. And so everyone turned them away, and pretty quickly. And they went to us. They came to us. And I can't imagine what that was like at that time, considering what social, economic conditions we were living in. But we said, yes, we'll take a chance. And so we went and we partnered with them, and we were able to obtain the land and trust for the benefit of that school. So that casino's purpose for even being was for that school. And, as you might know, it started with a bingo hall, and it was kind of like a tin structure, tin can, but we were successful. And if now the Indian Community Schools, just outside of Milwaukee and Franklin, it's state-of-the-art facility. It's gorgeous. It almost looks like a Wright building, right, or a Wright home in large scales. All 4 of my children have gone there. Their first languages were their native language. On a daily basis, they are instilled with pride of being a Native American child, right? What do you think that means to someone like my grandmother, my mother? You can't put words to it, right? So that's what that casino did. That's what their purpose was, and they were successful, and that school is funded into perpetuity. We also have, as in Forest County, many tribal offices, as you know, a health and wellness center, right? We have a cultural museum. My nephew will share more about that later. The 2 hotels. We have a data center, a biodigester, right? So we're trying to really diversify our business, but also be a community partner and responsible. In the spirit of that, we created the Forest County Pottawatomie Foundation, and we said, with this other money, and believe me, you might hear that natives don't pay taxes. Not true. Through our compacts, we pay more than we ever would. And in 2016, at that time, we had already given $30 million to charitable causes in the Milwaukee area. So that's huge, and that's who we are today, and that's because of people like Chief Simon. So look at these cuties. So this one is my little Benjamin. That's a baby. The one in the middle is my nephew, Elias. And then that's my son, Joa. These are all from Forest County, Pottawatomie, little Pottawatomie babies, right? In our teachings, we're taught about 7 generations. And what that really tells us is that what we do today should echo 7 generations into the future, that we should have that reverence and respect. And so when I do things like that, I try to keep that in mind and have this picture in my mind, because this is who we have our focus on and who we are concerned for. So with that, I want to say Chimigwech. Thank you very much. That's Pottawatomie. Thank you. What time am I at?
Yeah, you're on time.
Oh, okay.
Amazing.
Oh, thank you. I think we're taking a break, correct? Okay. 10 minutes? Okay, so we can have a 10-minute break. You can get up. I think we'll do questions at the end if you had specific questions for me, but I just want to say thank you for listening and thank you for your kind attention. Oh my goodness, what do I have all over me? Good morning.
Good morning, all. I'm Mark Nelson with the the Door County Civility Project. And for the last 6 years, we have co-sponsored the speaker series here at the auditorium in January and February and a couple times in March about important topics that people want to listen to and particularly want to get out of the house in January and March. And the Civility Project, what we try to do is give people the tools to be more civil. And it's a Speak Your Piece program. The tools are pay attention, listen, be inclusive, don't gossip, show respect, be agreeable, apologize, give constructive criticism, and take responsibility. Now, for the purposes of full disclosure, my wife finds it incredulous that I have the audacity to try to teach anybody else how to listen. I mean, last night we're watching the Olympics, and they have this crazy sport where they come down this mountain on skis, and they go up, it's a ramp, but I mean, it's vertical, and fly up in the air and do flips and spins. But unlike other events that they're spinning around where you can, the best out of 2 or 3, in this one, you can't, if you use a trick in the preliminary, you can't use it in the finals. So they were telling that on the TV, and I was listening, and my wife was talking, I was pretty sure she didn't hear that. So she said, well, what? And I said, what? Well, what's your answer? And I said, well, what happens is they can't use the preliminary one, you know, in the finals there. She says, I asked you, what did you have for lunch? So, with that, what we want to say here is all of you folks are doing acts of civility today because you're paying attention to Native American traditions, you're listening and learning about the history, you're being inclusive because you're including folks that you probably don't normally talk to very often. You're showing respect. By being here, you're showing the respect that they deserve from all the things that they've had to go through. You're being agreeable so that you find more information to be agreeing on various issues that they have. And you're taking responsibility. So for that, we thank you all for that. We do presentations. Currently, we're doing the Door County Sheriff's Department, and we'll be doing some DEI training in the fall at Learning in Retirement. So you can get a hold of us at doorcountycivilityproject.org. We are free. We do groups from anywhere from 10 people to 300 people. Again, have a great morning. Bye-bye.
Okay, can everybody hear me well? Okay, I want to say Mano Gishke, which means good morning in my language, Pottawatomie. I hope you guys enjoyed my aunt's presentation. I found it very wonderful. Not only is she my aunt, but she's also a mentor for me throughout my academic career and also through other many youth in our tribe. So it is really amazing to be able to participate with her today and see her demonstrate in live action rather than just talking about it later. So thank you for that, and I hope you guys enjoy mine. My name is Autry Johnson. As I said before, I'm from Forest County. I grew up there until I went to school. I graduated from Michigan State with a BA in International Relations and Comparative Cultures and Politics. My focuses are international law and humanitarianism/sovereignty, as well as post-colonial/colonial theory. It's kind of a mouthful to bring about, but all of these have reference to not only my interest for academia, but however, they have a lot of interest for my tribe as well. My whole life I grew up on the reservation, and I would always hear this talk about how sovereignty is important, sovereignty is this, sovereignty is that. And you would also talk about, United States government sovereignty, international thought. So I'm like, I really find this weird attraction towards it. I'm like, but I don't know why. And I was like, I'm just gonna go study it. And throughout my academic career, I found a great amount of knowledge that's not only useful through, international relations theory, also for my tribe of governance, but it brought me back to understanding our own history as well as our own culture that is specific. So again, I'm filling in for my my grandfather, Joseph Daniel Sr. He was unable to make it due to a family emergency. He was gonna come today to give you more of an in-depth demonstration of Pottawatomie culture, both traditional and contemporary. But because of his emergency, he had asked me specifically to step in for him. And I might not have as much of the spiritual knowledge as him, but I do have the historical/academic background in order to demonstrate it. So I was thankful for him to allow me to step in for him, but I would recommend anybody, if they want to see more things in person, to visit our museum in Forest County. It is a great museum, has a lot of artifacts and a lot of knowledge, and it's also a pretty cool place to see. So highly, highly recommend that. So to begin, I'll be talking about specifically sovereignty, not only like governance sovereignty or indigenous sovereignty, but sovereignty in both realms of Western thought and indigenous/Anishinaabe thought. Also with that, I'll be talking about contemporary Pottawatomie identity and identity as well, and what it means for us in this day and age. And the last thing I'll be talking about specifically is global issues. It might be a little confusing to see how this correlates with indigenous sovereignty, but if you just hang along with me, I think you'll be able to understand, so I'd say thank you. To begin with that, though, I wanted to ask, because I've traveled the world a lot. I've been to almost 30 countries and 5 continents, and one of the things that I really like to do is when I meet people who I don't know, rather than identifying our differences, I always focus on our similarities that could connect us. Specifically in South America, North Africa, the Middle East, or in Europe, I've been able to make a lot of friends who I've always found are similarities that connect us. And with that, it always brought me back to this idea of how it goes to our own cultural values of being Pottawatomie. So with that, I ask, everybody knows the story of Genesis in the Bible, yes? Adam and Eve were created, animals came first, but then they were exiled from the garden because of the temptation of the apple. And it was interesting to see that because if you look at the creation stories of our people, the Pottawatomie, we have Sky Woman. Sky Woman was in a garden, and because of her own interest of looking down below, she had fell from this garden, and she landed on the turtle's back. And it was always interesting to make that connection, saying is our people, for our creation stories, it was a woman who also left from the garden. And across the ocean, this creation story, not creation story, but this story of similarity was specific, saying that a woman was banned from the garden. So I'd like to take that in a way of saying that we have a connection in a way that is between our people. Even if there are differences that are both ethnically or culturally, I always find it amazing if we could find a cultural or just similarity in general. So thank you. So to begin, because we are Anishinaabe Pottawatomie, we always talk about stories. Stories are important for us. Stories are what can guide us. And with stories, there's never one specific meaning that you can take from traditional Native stories, but there's many things you can analyze. And for that, I had asked my aunt today if she would talk about a story that is relevant for Pottawatomie identity. And it is called Marked by Fire, and it goes with our hero, Nana Bojo. To give you a little background, Pottawatomie, which is a French spelling of the word, it's traditionally pronounced Pottawatomie. As my aunt had mentioned, I speak French. I had learned that in order to read documents of our tribe. So people think that when we say hello, which is Bojo, people think, oh, that's a French influence on our tribe. And I'm like, that could be, but if you look at our traditional stories, it actually goes with our hero, Nana Bojo. It has the word hello. This man was actually the son of the Sky Woman who fell from the earth onto the heaven. And his task in the world was to go around from all 4 directions of the world and go and say hello and name the animals and plants for us. So that's where we get this from. Bojo means hello, and when we see each other, that's why we say hello to you, because even if we know each other or don't, we introduce ourselves. So with that, I asked my aunt to read this beautiful story, and we'll talk about how this is prevalent for Pottawatomie identity as well as sovereignty.
Do I need that?
Okay. Nana Bojo was being brought up by his grandmother. And so by and by, he said to his grandmother, "Do you know of a place where there are some people?" "Yes," he was told by his grandmother. "In yonder direction on the farther shore of the sea are some people. I'm curious to know if they do not possess fire." "Yes," he was told by his grandmother, "they do not possess some fire." Upon this revelation, Nana Bojo said that he would go and try to fetch some of that fire. His grandmother warned him that it would be a difficult task, one that would likely not succeed in. But Nana Bojo was determined. Now this was what he then said afterwards, I will that the sea shall freeze as thick as birch bark covering of the lodge. So let this sea freeze. It was true that it happened, and he said it. Now this is the way I shall look, he said. I will that I become a hare. So accordingly, that truly was the way he looked. Nanabuju has conjured a method of acquiring fire, and across the water, an old man sat, constantly working on his net. As the old man had 2 daughters, Nanabuju thought he would transform himself into a hare, knowing the young girls would take to him in that form. And with that, he willed it to be. Then he thought that the lake would freeze, and thus it was so. Nanabuju ran across the lake. He willed those young girls to come find him and take him into their home, and so it was so. The girls placed Nanabuju by the fire so that he could dry. Yet their loud giggling alarmed their father, who came to investigate what his daughters were up to. Beware, they were told by their father. Have you not heard of the Manitus, how they were born? Manitous, how they were born? Perhaps this might be one of them. When he heard these words of caution, Nanabuju knew he needed to act quickly. He willed a spark of that fire to jump onto him, and so it was. And thus he leapt out of the window and began running across the frozen lake. The old man pursued him, but to no avail. Nanabuju ran quickly and soon returned home, but he was much on fire. He pleaded to his grandmother to rub out the fire off of him, and she said, and thus they had fire. Yet Nanabuju was marked by his quest. His white fur had turned brown, scorched from carrying the fire across the lake. And so Nanabuju proclaimed, therefore such shall be the look of the hare in the summertime.
Thank you for that, Auntie. Okay, thank you for that, Auntie. So just to dive into that, it's a really great story. We tell it to kids. People think, this kid have a lot of issues with, morality, theft. There could be a lot of meanings for it. But I broke it down into 3 sectors here. And I really like how Nanabuju, as a Manigo, the shapeshifter, he would often take the form of the wabozo, the rabbit. Cute little furry thing to run around. Love that animal. But specifically, he was used for his gift for being quick and also being able to hear everything so he could protect himself. Now, in our stories, especially our oral stories, we can only tell these stories during a certain time of the year. Right now, I'm allowed to tell it because there is snow on the ground. This takes place in the winter. And when you think of now today, when you see rabbits, they adapt to the environment from summer and winter. Here, the Nanabuju is in winter, and he has a white coat to adapt and hide. But then when summer comes, he is marked, and he is able to change his fur. So with that, and you talk about how this is relevant to Pottawatomie identity, think of it as Nanabuju representing the nation, or fire representing the environment, and Nanabuju, because he was infected by fire, or touched by fire, he is now adapted to his environment of the fire affecting him, meaning he changes colors throughout the seasons. This is really important and prevalent for a thought of indigenous sovereignty. Sovereignty may have self-determination for indigenous people today, but it talks about the ever-changing environment that we are always going through. My aunt's wonderful presentation today talked about our chiefs and how she brought them as a liaison, advocate, etc. These people were specifically adapting to the environment for the good of their people, the good of their nation. And that is one of the main aspects of what sovereignty is in an indigenous perspective. It is what we have in self-determination in always adapting to the environment around us. And that can mean anything, bad weather, bad economy. However, it talks in a very literal analysis of anything that could be affecting. And today we'll dive into that specifically of how it has transformed and evolved since, for quite a while now. So, with that, you have traditional indigenous sovereignty. You have traditional and cultural teachings and stories. Marked by fire is specific, and I told you it's about the ever-changing environment of what's happening around us. Specifically today, Forest County Pottawatomie is a federally recognized nation amongst over 570 federally recognized tribes. We have a constitution that dictates our sovereignty as well as treaties to be honored for it. That is a way of casing this, that indigenous sovereignty is always adapting to the environment. For us to have in a Western perspective, we had to adapt by creating a constitution to allow us to have this sovereignty. But it goes more into it, specifically with the name of our tribe as well. You have etymology specifically here. So if you go back to this slide, you have the word for fire, which is skode. Skode in its etymology is important because everything in Pottawatomie, well, not everything, but a lot of cultural and identity words, they all are prevalent from the word ode, the heart. Skode, which means fire, means part of the heart. The fire is what is life. The heart is life. The heart of the nation. We are keepers of the fire. In our actual language, we are Pottawatomie, which again has the word right there, heart. We are keepers of the fire, we are keepers of life, etc. And we come from the three fires confederacy. We have the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and then the youngest, which is our tribe, the Pottawatomie, or Pottawatomie. And these are important for us because it talks about a lot of things that are specific for our culture. Now, earlier I mentioned when I say you make connections, or I like to make connections based off of off of similarities. It talks about I wanted to talk about specifically of how our cultural values have brought me in this journey of life across the world. Specifically, when you look at the word for relationship or community, the word in Pottawatomie is odenwa, and that means a web of interconnected hearts. We connect to each other by the heart. We negotiate. This is how we build relationships when we talk to people in our community and our family. And that's important because that makes us understand each other on a more personal and human level. And it goes way beyond that too as well. With that, I had mentioned the Three Fires Confederacy. Pottawatomies are keepers of the fire. And this was used a lot during times of United States / British / French or whatever you might call it, especially with other nations. Pottawatomie were key in these negotiations as well as treaty making. Specifically, we are keepers of the fire. So much of the business that was done with the Three Fires Confederacy through treaty was always done first with the Pottawatomie, because not only our names, but we were good at negotiating, we were good at trade, we were good at diplomacy, etc. All these things were important for Indigenous people during the time as well as today. As my aunt again mentioned, that how our tribe has transformed to being a very leading tribe in all of Indian country, it also showcases again that we are trying to advocate for that changing environment in order to lead for our people, lead for the Anishinaabe. And with that, we also have these other cultural teachings that talk about governance. So when I thought about international relations, I thought just about, nation-to-nation contact, Chinese-American relations, etc. That's a very Western perspective of it that is important. And for Indigenous people, we have always had a form of international relations, but it goes beyond people. With that, you have the four realms of the worlds that we have. So I'll introduce myself again quickly in Pottawatomie. Bojo, mahishka khanijinga dijnikas bude wadmi mine o kakadao, gno ondo dam ishka gyok nichbia. Right there, I just made reference to the four realms of what we live at this moment. First, I introduced my spirit name, Mahishka Hanajinga. That talks about my relation to who I am specifically, but when it comes to that time of going into the spirit world. The second forms I put is the human relations, my nations. My father is of the Pottawatomie, my mom is of the Ho-Chunk tribe. That right there showcases and demonstrates how we have a form of international relations, not only from me being a child, but also the relations to where I come from, and also the land of where these tribes are. I said I am from Stone Lake, or the cold place. I have a duty to that land. This is the land that I come from. And then when I mentioned my clan, Eagle, that talks about the relation to what my duty is with animals. So our form of international relations has always been in our language. There's much more with our language too besides cultural teachings. And with that, I found it interesting that it kind of brought me to this revelation while I was studying in my undergrad for international relations. This is a new theory that's being talked about, and we can use these for issues that are specific for us in this day and age, such as global issues. So with that, I have this specific for Potawatomi sovereignty, as I said, cultural identity. You have the medicine wheel here, which has a lot of teachings into it. It can be the four medicines, the four directions, but it also represents the four colors of people. You have the red, yellow, black, and white. Although they might be different from one another, they're still the same. We're all people on the inside. No matter what happens to where the differences that divide us, if I were to cut my hand, I would bleed red, just as you guys would bleed red. Because that's the thing, is even though we have differences, we're all similar from one another. And that's what kind of guides me in my travels around the world, as well as my academic career. With that, you have the modern forms, which I mentioned specifically, the Constitution. However, you have self-determination, which is kind of a modern, but is more traditional. Specifically, when you think of governance in the United States, we can determine what's right for us without the influence of other countries. Same thing for Native American nations. We can determine what's best for us without the influence of other people, but it also goes down into the individual. I can determine what's best for me as well as for my tribe without the influence of other people trying to tell me. And that's the whole journey of what we have for governance and sovereignty and why it's important for our identity. So, when you think of sovereignty and land, there's always this idea of saying, well, where were we from? Where did we come from, etc. And my aunt was mentioning the land acknowledgement. I wanted to bring this new map up of the modern reservation system. We all know this is the United States, and these little purple dots represent what is indigenous sovereign land. It's a lot smaller than what it used to be. But we can only move forward together. But for us, when you talk about Forest County being right there, it's specific saying that we only have duty to that area that is defined by boundaries. For indigenous people, it's not specific to a boundary. It goes into more of the interrelated levels of plants, animals, and the land beyond. And that's important for us because we're trying to reevaluate these values in order to move together with people, but we just have a hard time, but we're doing better in order to further develop these ideas of sovereignty, not only for us, but for people in general. So, it goes into this question, though, of how we talk about contemporary identity and how it affects us. So I wanted to showcase this specifically about the history of who is considered people. As I mentioned, we're all people. But it wasn't always that way for everybody. Specifically, when you think of the United States federal government, you have a citizen of the state. We're coming very close to the anniversary of the United States Citizenship Act of 1924 for indigenous people. Before then, our ancestors were not considered American citizens. If we wanted to be citizens, we cannot speak our language, we cannot practice our cultural values, and we cannot even omit anything that was specific to being Native American. My aunt had mentioned the boarding schools that had affected our family. And that was what we had to go through, either by force or by choice, in order to be citizens. But in 1924, we were allowed to become citizens, but it wasn't by our own choice. This was imposed by us, by the United States government. It was good because we were finally seen as equal, to a degree, as one another. However, there was a sacrifice that was required from the United States. If we are citizens of the state and we are equal to one another, then we don't need this special recognition as being Native American and having sovereignty. You have the same opportunity to vote, same economic opportunity to grow, say cultural opportunity, etc., but we could not define ourselves as Native American. We had to submit to become American. And this is a touchy issue because we didn't ask for it, but we want to be a part of the United States because this is the land that was taken. But how can we participate into this dialogue if it doesn't allow us to be ourselves? Again, 1924 allowed us to be citizens, but we were not allowed to still speak our languages in schools or practice being Native American. This was never a thing until about the last 50 years, which I'll talk about through the American Indigenous movement. And with that, following the Second World War, I wanted to touch up on something. So, we know the Second World War had a very devastating effect in modern Europe. The Holocaust had killed about 2/3 of the European Jewish population. People were trying to say, how can we become such an atrocious act? We're all human, we all need equal rights. With that, you had the UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Great landmark recognition. However, it excluded one people, indigenous people. Although everybody in the world is considered to be human and has the right to self-determination, indigenous people, no. You don't get that. It wasn't actually until 2007 that the United Nations had made the Declaration of Indigenous People. But this wasn't on their own doing. This had a lot of advocacy and over 50 years of momentum in order to bring to this international recognition. And it just showcases that even though today, me and my aunt or everybody in the United States is allowed to be who they are, regardless of their ethnical differences, we still have a lot to fight in order to have the same equal opportunity from one another, not only here in the United States, but as well as the world. Forest County, Pottawatomie are only in Wisconsin. There are 13 recognized tribes between the United States and Canada. And right there, I just mentioned Canada. our brother tribe in Canada has different issues to advocate for sovereignty compared to the United States. So I just wanted to mention that specifically. Wait, it's the wrong way. So with that, I wanted to touch up on contemporary Pottawatomie identity. 1 sec, I just take some water. So I will mention or ask what is contemporary identity or what is cultural identity. But with that, when you think of contemporary, this is what a lot of people mention towards. We all know what this is, right? Mascots. So imagine me. I'm 22 years old, born in the last year of the 90s, 99. This is, besides anything mentioned in school books, the only representations of my people, and I'm not talking about our tribe, I'm talking about indigenous people, they were all based off of images like this, or based off of Western movies and depictions of Hollywood. I grew up with big family. I'm part of 8 siblings. There was a game, what was it called? Cowboys and Indians. This is the game that my family would play a lot. I found it ironic that my family was playing it specifically. Because I'm like, well, there's not going to be no 2 teams because we're all, here. And for some reason, we would still divide ourselves. I want to be the cowboy, I want to be the Indian. Which is like, well, can we do that? But when you look at that, or when you look at movies, they often depict Native Americans as backwards savages. We aren't clean, we only know war and destruction, and also our very existence is threatening to the society that has been built on this land. And with that, I always thought that was interesting because when we would play Cowboys and Indians, my family, who would be the cowboys, would often try to shoot the Indians even though they were Indians. It was just like, that just kind of shows the effect of how these depictions of us hold for us specifically. Like, look at me. My physiognomy is not based off of this area of what is depicted here. My physiognomy is specifically more paler skin, I have a beard, and these types of images, or images that are specifically mentioned in Hollywood, could be damaging to a person like me. I am from the Pottawatomie tribe, which is Anishinaabe, which comes from the woodland areas between Canada, the United States, and the Great Lakes. But most depictions of Native Americans are those down south near the border, or the Navajo, which are very, very dark skin, black hair. But if you go to our brothers and tribes up north, they have a little bit different complexion. And I know science can tell you, oh yeah, the closer you are to the equator, but imagine that these are the only images of what represents a Native American. So with that, I go into what contemporary identity is in culture. So when you think of contemporary, there are 2 parts that were mentioned in layman's term, marked by characteristics of the present period, happening, existing, living, or coming into being during the same period of time. So contemporary means of what's happening right now. I'm speaking English, so perhaps English has an effect of why I speak English has an effect of how I view my identity. What is happening for the American contemporary identity is based off the political climate as well as social dynamics that are happening right now. But with that, it's different from what is culture. Culture is the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. However, with this anthropological understanding of it, culture is not static, meaning that it is stuck in time and place. When you think again about these depictions, or the Western depictions of Native Americans are always a forgotten people stuck within 100 years ago, and the people who are today that can claim Native Americans, they're not the same as who they were 150 years ago, which can be true, but most depictions until very recently state that Native Americans are dead and that our people are just survivors and that's it. But that's not the instance here. Culture is always evolving, always changing. And just like for our national identity, marked by fire, fire is always changing and evolving to the environment. Wind comes and blows on it, it may get bigger or smaller. However, as long as it's being fed, it can continue to grow and it will continue to warm us. So with that, we talk about how Pottawatomie identity has emerged in what it is today. And I use this picture of my cousin here. When we think about contemporary identity of today, this is, powwow regalia. Powwow regalia, I like to dance at powwows. I'm a grass dancer. This is a fancy dancer. But when you think about powwows, that it goes into more of the understanding of being Native American. Powwows aren't traditional to Pottawatomie. They actually aren't traditional to any tribe. It's a contemporary thing happening within the last 100 years. We made it into a gathering for ourselves. However, and they are cultural now, but they are not traditional. Heritage is traditional. So when you talk about the origins of the family, origins of the Pottawatomie, you can think of specifically of where we come from and how our language works and how our etymology can dictate that. So if you look at the anthropological/linguistic approach of it, Pottawatomie is an Algonquin/woodland language, but our word for Algonquin actually just translates to the oldest bush. That's just over there. We have similarities with them. And we could be, but we have our own stories of how we're from this area. Again, like I said, we're not confined to a specific boundary. We've always been around these areas of what is woodland. And even so, we've always gone beyond these areas to negotiate with other tribes. You can think about how we have diplomacy into some of the medicine lodges practiced within our own tribe, Big Drum, etc. So with that, you go from Algonquin to the Anishinaabe, the original people. Again, this is the Three Fires Confederacy, the Odawa, Pottawatomie, or Pottawatomie, and Ojibwe. But at this time period, you have to remember that this is around the 16th century, and what had happened around this time specifically in what is called the New World at that time. You have the arrivals of explorers. Jean Nicolet or the other French people, they all were the ones who discovered us, or not discovered, who made first contact. Pottawatomie is a French-sounding word, and what is the capital of Canada? Ottawa. Ottawas are keepers of the trade. At that time period, you had the French fur trade, which was very specific into negotiating with Native Americans in order to keep that trade process. And that has been something that has affected us specifically. So when you think of Pottawatomie today, you have the modern form of national identity. This is Pottawatomie now, but has affected us. But with that, you also have other forms of identity that have been given to us, not by our own choice. Again, 1924 was the American Citizenship Act, but by that time we were considered American Indian, which has now transgressed to being Native Americans/First Nations. And again, that is a collective umbrella term of all indigenous people here between Canada and the United States, as well as below. But that doesn't mean specifically we called each other that. We had our names for each other's nations. We had our names for the differences that connected us. Native American now, I may identify as Native American based off of the consensus, but 150 years ago, if you ask what do you call all people before the European arrivals, they would never say Native American. They would tell either original people, or they would just say the nations of all people. But this has grown into something we have. I mentioned the powwow. This is something that has become a Native American collective identity. So here's a map that talks about the Anishinaabe people as well as others. Specifically, you have the Pottawatomie, which were there until about the Treaty of Chicago for our tribe, until we get into this area. You have the Ojibwe, the Odawa, as well as I mentioned here, the Algonquin. This is what is now in French-speaking Canada. So I mentioned earlier how you have the etymology of Pottawatomie. You have the heart. Fire is important for us because it doesn't only show a form of alliance, but it also has a lot of cultural meanings, spirit meanings. And everything we have from that goes with it comes from the heart. As I mentioned this already, you also have oral traditions that are specific to Pottawatomie. What is it that makes us different from other tribes? What is it that makes us similar? What is our duty into this world, our duty of life? And when I mentioned the story of Marked by Fire, that was very important for us in order to have this ever-changing involvement to the environment, but we also have more to what it keeps for our language in our way of government. So I mentioned the 1924 American Citizenship Act, and this is a label from the other, meaning the Native Americans didn't give ourselves this name, it was given by the United States government. We might have been considered citizens, but we still didn't have the full right to participate. So with that, we come into a contemporary analysis, which is the intersectionality of identity and the movement of solidarity between indigenous peoples. So with that, I come into one of my favorite topics to study at school, which is colonialism and its effects. So contemporary means at this time and moment. How do effects of colonialism alter Pottawatomie identity? So again, marked by fire. How has colonialism affected our fire? How have we adapted in order to keep our form of governance, in order to keep our form of national identity alive? So with that, you start with this great doctrine that is still relevant actually today in the United States, the Doctrine of Discovery. Is anybody here like history? History? Yeah, I love history. Okay, so I did a study abroad in Spain, in Andalusia, which is the traditional Moor or Muslim part of Spain until it was conquered in 1492. 1492, ironically, was the same year that Columbus had sailed on his expedition into the New Worlds. So, the reason why I mentioned that is about 30 years before, you had the conquest of the Moors by the Spanish or Iberian crowns. Specifically, with this, while they were conquering more and more south in what would be modern-day Andalusia, the Pope, Alexander VI, had given the right to conquer Granada in the name of religion. And with that, they started with this form of what is not ethnic identity, racial identity. Basically stating is, in the name of the church, us Christians or Catholics have the right to take this land from you Moors who are not Christian, meaning you are not of the same blood, and if you don't convert to our ways, you will either be expelled or killed, no other. With that, you had the whole form of cryptic Moors, cryptic Jews, etc. But that carried over in 1492. 1492, you had the arrival of Columbus to these lands that have never heard of Christianity, and he specifically stated, well, if they're not Christians, what do we have this right here? What can we do to these people? And the Pope, the same one, said, oh, well, if they're not Christian, and these lands have never heard of the Christian God, then they have every right to be taken in the name of our crown, in the name of our empire, thus beginning the conquest of the modern colonial state. And this also has its effect still today, specifically. You have limpieza de sangre, which is cleaning with the blood, meaning that anybody not of Christian blood has to be killed or expelled. However, that was one of the main doctrines that affected for Native Americans to today. Me and my aunt are part of a tribe that has blood quantum laws specifically to it. I have to be a certain amount of blood of not only Native American, but specifically Pottawatomie, to be enrolled as a Native American. It's ironic, though, because at the same time in the political climate of the United States, they had the one-drop rule for people of African American descent, stating that if you have one drop of Negro blood, you are not white. So you could have a very far ancestor that was from Africa and say, oh, but if that happens, you're not considered white. But for us, we have to prove that we're at least a certain percent in order to take this form of identity of being Native American. And that's affecting us, and it was actually used as a tactic in order to murder all our people. So with that, I have this video. So, following 1492, you have the arrival of the Spanish Empire, and with that, they began to open this new form of a global economy, specifically what is now the modern form of globalization. Globalization today is a great thing. We share social, cultural, and economic similarities on a global scale. On a global scale, I'm able to buy my iPhone manufactured in China for a very cheap price compared if it were to be manufactured here in the United States. However, it is important to mention that globalization's history comes from colonialism and the exploitation of indigenous land and raw materials in the name of European empires. And with that, it also began to have the decrease of Native American tribes as well as its population in what is considered the New World. Specifically, and it's important to pay attention if these represent, the bluish purple color represents Native Americans. With this time, before the founding of the United States, you already notice a huge missing part of what is modern-day Mexico, as well as the migration of Native people into the Midwest Territory. This is around the time you have the Northwest, no, actually not, but before the formulation of the Northwest Territory following the Revolutionary War, as well as the more arrival of Europeans and founding of the United States. This is pre of it. But look at, what was considered almost bluish purple has now been almost diminished, and now it has become infected by red, yellow, people who aren't from this area. This land is everybody's land. It's just we had origins to it, but that doesn't mean that it has the right to kill the people who occupied it, as in the name of raw goods and materials. And this still continues to this day. All right. So with that, it comes into what is global issues. So I mentioned before of how we have specific things to be recognized as people, not only in international law, but as well as federal law. But one of the things when you talk about global issues is this can be equated to indigenous issues, specifically. Indigenous people aren't only living in the United States. They go into Canada, Mexico, all of South America, parts of New Zealand, Australia, any Anglo-Saxon state. One of the things is until 2007, we weren't considered to be people of these states. And ironically, I wanted to mention, in 2007, when this declaration was declared, out of 148 countries, 144 countries signed onto them, excluding 4, which were Anglo-Saxon states. Those, or Anglo-Saxon countries. Those countries were the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. All except for those 4 countries said, yeah, indigenous people are people, except for those 4 countries. Out of shame, about 6 years later, all of them had changed the decision, but with specific conditions. With that, when we have the acceptance of indigenous people as people, we can move on to the next part, which is the solidarity of cosmopolitan values to move forward together. Well, this is a very political term, or a political science term, cosmopolitanism. But it's great. It talks about how we're all people, no matter the differences that we have, because we can have these shared values of being human with one another. And that's an important step for us to move forward. After that, we can finally move on to issues that are considered global, such as climate change. So with that, you have this formulation that brought us to the 2007 United Nations Declaration of Indigenous People. You have the American Indian movement. The American Indian movement was formed after people who were leaving their reservation system. Remember, reservation was detained in order for Native Americans to be Native. If Native Americans were to leave the reservation following the Citizenship Act, they were kind of breaking this law saying, oh, they can be Native American outside of the reservation, which was very ironic, and it caused a lot of violence against Native American people that still continues to exist to this day. So with that, the AIM formulation of 1968 was created around the Minneapolis, Minnesota area. And with that, you have the nations of the Oceti, Saco, and Oyati, or the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota-speaking people, as well as Anishinaabe, Cree, and other Native American tribes that would relocate to these cities at the time. They formed together in solidarity in order to protest as well as protect Native American people who were being harassed by police, as well as having other forms of racial injustice. With that, they created the 20 points formation, which gave these ideas of saying, this is what Native people want. Remember, at this time in the political environment, you had the termination era of the United States around 1950s. The termination era, again, was juxtaposed to this idea that citizens are equal to one another. Therefore, indigenous sovereignty does not need to exist today because they are equal. So they were beginning their termination policy for indigenous people. Out of protest, Native Americans had occupied 4 specific areas that were controlled by the United States. You have Alcatraz Island in San Francisco, the BIA headquarters in Washington, D.C., Mount Rushmore in South Dakota, and Wounded Knee. These were ideal because not only were they either illegally taken, such as Mount Rushmore, which actually has no legal claim towards it, it was taken by a violation of treaties, but also the BIA headquarters had found a lot of information that was hidden not hidden from the executive government, it was hidden from the executive government, as well as the judicial, in order to understand that Native Americans have these treaty rights that actually have to be honored, they have to be recognized, and they have to be fought for. But the BIA, which was created, remember, it started from the War Department in the United States and got later transferred to the Secretary of the Interior. It was stated that these people don't actually deserve to have their treaty rights, and any funding that was given to these Native American reservations wouldn't actually be given to these people. So with that, they were able to make a revelation in the international system. However, there are still many people that were wrongly imprisoned today. With that, you have these global achievements of indigenous people. 1992 was the 500th year of Columbus's arrival to the New Worlds. With that, Spain and the Vatican had asked the year prior that if the UN would allow the year of 1992 to be a year of celebration of colonialism in the world. Out of protest, almost all African states, as well as many South American states, had left the United Nations headquarters in order to protest this event. With that, you also had more social movements from indigenous people to allow this idea to have a year of mourning for the tragedies that had happened because of colonialism. Which, ironically, following around that same year, you had not Columbus Day following what would be original Columbus Day, you paved the way for the first Indigenous Peoples Day. This was one of the first steps in order to have that recognition. And with that, about almost 20 years later, you have the UN Declaration of Indigenous People. Again, the 22 points to reiterate sovereignty, and it's a landmark recognition for that Indigenous people are people in the world. With that, we have been able to create alliances as well to have this further understanding of sovereignty for all Indigenous people. You have US, I meant to put US Native Americans in Palestine for what is happening there, as well as the International Indian Treaty Council. This is specific in order to commemorate and remember what treaty rights are, as well as advocate for them to be pushed forward by federal governments. With that, we can have solidarity together if we come to these things. You have the political term of cosmopolitanism. All humans are citizens to the world in a universal community. We may have borders, but at the end of it, we are still people at the end of it. With that, we can go into more indigenous values of how it can have it, how we can move forward. And there is a prophecy that is specific to Anishinaabe culture. It's called the prophecy of the 7 fires. To boil it down very quickly, the first fire through the 6th fire was to say that Native Americans were in the world, but there would be arrival of the white man to come. The white man will bring great honor, but also they will bring great destruction. Depends on the time area of what the fire is. With the time of destruction, they will try to take the land as well as the resources away in the name of the Black Book. Native Americans were to make it specific that the Black Book wasn't the danger, it was the man behind the Black Book, utilizing it to get his further advancement. But with that, it came to the 6th fire, which would state that Native Americans would lose their way, would lose their values of governance, as well as their duties to this land, and it would create destruction not only for themselves, but for the world. And with that, you have the 7th generation fire. That would be our generation of the people here, but specifically to what would go towards mine. With that, you have Indigenous people reverting back to their values of tradition, but it will be hard to find those. Elders for years have lost their ways or have been ashamed to teach them, and it would be very difficult in order to commemorate what those are specific. But with that, with the 7th generation fire, you'll be given a choice. Either we can come to solidarity together and move forward in one in order to address issues that affect us all, or we can deny it, which will cause further destruction to the land and eventually cause great destruction and murder to all people, regardless of their differences. So with that, we have this. Will the 7th fire allow the commitment of the 8th fire for harmony and balance, or will we furthermore go towards destruction with one another? So with that, I have some pictures to quickly show. Does anybody know what these pictures are? No? If I were to say, if those who know the international political environment, would people think this is here in the United States, in Mexican border, or in Palestine, between Israel and the Palestinian border? This is here in the United States in North and South Dakota for the Dakota Access Pipeline. Ironically, is during this time between 2016 and 2017, the protests or the crowd movements that were used by police are the same ones mirrored from what the Israeli forces would use for Palestinians, which actually violate international law. You cannot use mustard gas anymore in war, nor can you use tear gas in war signed by international law. However, the United States government, as well as other states, can use it against its own citizens to control protest. So with that, it brings this. These protests were in a way to have land and water protectors from issues that affect us all today. The Dakota Access Pipeline was a 2,147-mile pipeline going under many sources of water for people of around all areas, but it was specifically redesigned on indigenous land and sacred sites. And it was also not only a violation of sovereignty and international law, but it's also specifically to the towns above the reservation, which have a non-indigenous population specifically. With that, it brings us this question of the 7 fires prophecy, the destruction of Earth. Will we continue to exploit land and natural resources for economic interests in order to further develop what is considered not something natural to this world? Or can we find a way to bring land and water back to the people for all without having to sacrifice the economy? Meaning, can we protect this land and can we protect this water in a way of solidarity, or will it cause further destruction between our people and eventually cause death and destruction? And with that, we have a climate crisis that affects the world. I love Door County because it's kind of beautiful here. Everything's frozen, but I have a friend who used to come here to work in the summer, and he would always tell me to come visit him. It's amazing to have good forest in Wisconsin and to not have to worry about things that are affecting. But I have family in California that are affected by forest fires that are just outrageous. I live in Puerto Rico, and actually on my block, there's still reconstruction done from Hurricane Maria from 2017. These things are becoming prevalent to more people, but they may not affect us here, but eventually they can affect us here, or I should say will affect us here, but how can we stop this in a form of solidarity? This is something that is important because it doesn't affect only Indigenous people, it affects all people. This land is not our land, nor your land, it's everybody's land for everybody. It's not specific to who may have interest in that area. And I wanted to mention specifically that this pipeline continues today with protests in Line 3 in Minnesota. That's very close to Wisconsin. Imagine to where we have our own drinking water is being threatened by economic interests, only for something that is considered destructible to the environment. With that, we can go to this form of the 8th fire together in solidarity by not only reverting back to Indigenous values, but moving forward with one another. I find it amazing that people find it easier to imagine a climate crisis to where people can die from storms or from the loss of food. They think that's easier to think about rather than reiterating back on Indigenous values. Oh, we can have cities that have, food and corn or food for everybody. We can have cities that are more environmentally friendly. People have done this for thousands of years in order to live one with the earth. Why didn't we just go there? Why do people find it easier to think that climate crisis is inevitable? Why can't we go back to Indigenous values? And there's a great author. Her name is Leanne Bereshmowski Simpson. She is from Canada. She gives this Ojibwe term, which the definition here, and it's important for sovereignty. It's bishkabiang. The process of returning to ourselves, a re-engagement with the things we have left behind, a re-emergence, an unfolding from the inside out. It is a concept, an individual and collective process of decolonization and resurgence. How can our forms of decolonization of thinking that land is something only for economic interest go back to saying land is for everybody to live with one another? How is that important? So again, I close off with this. You have the medicine wheel, which represents the 4 people. Color is different, that's specific, but color is the same depending on how you view it, from angle as well as reflection of sunlight. These may be 4 different colors from one another, but it's the same. We are human. Forest County Pottawatomie, keeper of the fire, we keep our nation alive, but we have to lead in order to come together in a way of solidarity. So I'd like to say thank you for allowing me to speak about how Pottawatomie identity is specific with global issues. And I, again, would like to say thank you to my aunt for inviting me and my grandfather Joe, as well as all of Door County for listening to me of this specific issue. Chimiigwech.
Thank you, Autry. Thank you, Starla. We so appreciate you coming and joining us today and sharing this information and sharing your wisdom with us. We now would like to take questions both from our audience here in person as well as folks watching along on our live stream. We do have, we'll have this microphone and another microphone, and please wait for the microphone to reach you. We might be able to hear you here, but our folks listening at home would not be able to. So if you'll take this first question, thank you. I also, before we get there, I want to thank again our partners, UWGB's First Nations program and Door Civility Project, and we hope to see all of you back here on March 5th.
Well, thank you very much. This was a great, an awesome presentation. My question is, how do we, as the colonial people, ally with you in bringing about the 8th fire?
I would say the first step is recognition for what has happened in the past in order to address this issue. one of the things that affect my community, or a lot of Indigenous communities, is to build that trust between Native people and non-Native people. With education, as well as recognition, you are able to build that trust first, and then you could ask to share values with one another. Part of my goal for what I'm researching for my master's thesis include only in a twofold manner of saying I want to increase the knowledge of giving back and work of Indigenous values, but I also want to increase in the academic section of Indigenous values of relations outside of, technical analysis such as anthropology or Native American studies. You can include other Native American themes into other forms of academia such as international relations, etc. And with that, you can be able to share. So I would ask that if you can try to incorporate us in a way of that dialogue to build trust, and then ask for the values that we can teach.
Totally agree. Center Native Voices, convene around community like we've done today.
Again, I thank you for coming. It's been very interesting. And I know right now there's a big hoopla in our country about teaching critical race theory. And I'm wondering how that relates to your issues as well.
That's yours. You
That's
know
mine?
That. Yeah,
Oh, goodness.
You know that.
Okay.
We could talk about this all day.
Put it down into this. I can start in, let's talk about when I first moved to Spain for 6 months. I'll bring this there. It was very interesting because that was the origin of, the Doctrine of Discovery as colonialism. And I got a lot of hate from my own tribe going to Spain because this is where Columbus came from. So I started to ask people there specifically, how do they feel about, the arrival of the New Worlds? And they said, it was very shocking because they taught it different than how they taught it here. They were like, we murdered a lot of people in the name of our crown. And I'm like, so it's not like, stepped over or like walking on eggshells. And they're like, no, history is history. And they're like, it affects us today. Matter of fact, in the 70s, Spain came out of a dictator in which ethnic minorities were persecuted for their differences of not speaking Spanish as well as religious differences. So when it comes to here in the United States, we have this form of talking about truth and non-truth. And when it comes to truth, it's important to recognize what is truth, or what is objective normativity, what are facts. But it might make us feel different or uneasy about talking about them. But the thing is we're not, at least I'm not, trying to make you feel uncomfortable. I want you to see the things that affect us today that make us have this understanding. That affect us today that make us be seen this way, or makes me see you this way. And what I mean by that is like when I talk about the contemporary identity of Pottawatomie and how colonialism has affected us, I've always been told that I'm different from you. Like, I might have linguistic and cultural differences, but why can't I be taught that I'm similar to you? Why do we have to have these thoughts of being, these differences are what divide us, or, divide us. Like, it's good to be different because that makes me, me, and that's what makes you, you. But we have a similarity between one another. But we have to address these issues that affect me or you in the most truthful manner, because without it, we're going to lose history. And when we lose history, we kind of tend to repeat it. And that's important not to repeat it. It's the way we can learn lessons. The reason why our culture has these oral traditions that talk about greed, that talk about theft, that talk about, shared values. We have these stories that are continuing for us in order for us to not remember that. There's a story about maple syrup, for example. Maple syrup, Nanabojo, actually the one who stole fire, he came to a tribe and found the whole tribe with a hole in the tree, just sitting there and just drinking it as it was pouring into their mouths. At the time, the sap was more sweeter than it is now. So as a punishment to the tribe, Nanabojo diluted the sap in order to make it more hard for it to work for, but also a thing you have to wait for in order to get the final product. And I mean, that's a story for us to understand, like, what can happen if we're not, greed? If we're greedy. And it helps us go into this world saying, I can't be greedy. So when it comes to critical race theory and saying, we don't want people to get unsettled and think that they're the cause, you're not the cause of these things. My people, right now, I'm not a product, I'm not getting persecuted right now for being Native American, nor are you trying to persecute me for being Native American. But those things had happened to my grandmother, my great-grandmother. My aunt's grandmother was put into a boarding school. That affects us. Our language, for example, Pottawatomie, we have how many fluent speakers?
Under 10.
We have under 10 fluent speakers of Pottawatomie. I want to learn it, and when I go to certain elders in my tribe that speak it, they don't want to teach me because they're afraid that if I'm recording or taking notes, that I'm going to use it against them in a way that's not true. So we have to understand that this truth matters in order for us to go together, and we can't hide it because it's what brings us together in order to come together as one. So at least that's my part of it. I can go more and more, but I'm just trying to boil it down for that. But thank you. Want to say anything?
Yeah, no, I agree.
We need to just start speaking truth to each other, and I think that starts with, things just like Columbus Day that are still being celebrated in this country. I don't know how that is so, but it's certainly damaging to my little children. So we have to stop taking that pill and start being truthful about it. And as Audrey said, it's not us. There's no guilt or blame here, but we need to move forward in a good way.
So I'm going to, two things. One is very specifically what we can do, which is before my question, but thank you for raising that. In the last 2 weeks, there were congressional hearings. One of the things we specifically can do is respond during a public comment period that's going on right now. The museums that we know and love, Michigan State, Arizona State University of Alabama, still have in their collections hundreds of thousands of remains of ancestors. And I don't think any of us whose ancestors are buried in Blossomburg would think kindly on some university coming, digging them up, and then researching them. But those universities are allowed, or museums, are allowed to keep them because of claims of cultural unaffiliation. They claim they don't know to whom they belong, and therefore they get to hang on to them. There's the Native American Grave Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, which has been in effect since the 1980s, which governs this, has been stymied by this culturally unaffiliated label behind which museums are hiding. And I would strongly encourage anybody that has a bent to write a letter or contact that public comment period. If it hasn't already started, will be starting very, very soon. And usually it's like 60 days or whatever, so the Federal Register has a time limitation. But it's outrageous that cultural, sacred objects as well as actual remains are still being held in collections. And that process needs to move forward, and I think we can all help that. But that's not my question. That was only in response to, sorry. So I have a very narrow question that's not global at all. In the 1650s, when the Wendat, or as the French called them, the Huron fled west from Mackinac, they came to Door County. And apparently that was already sacred space for you, and they were on Huron Island, as they called it here, or Rock Island, just for a couple of years before moving west. Is there any, either an oral history, a tradition, or in the French or other written documents of how they were received? Here was a group that was loosely allied with the Odawa, but not of the same ethnographic background. Is there anything in the record about how the Wendat were received when they came to Huron Island?
I'm gonna go with poorly. No, no, I didn't see that specifically. Again, that wasn't where I went to research for. That would have to dig specifically for that. But I'm thinking that the prominent role that the Pottawatomie took, even with the tribes that are here in Wisconsin, says that they probably left a clear message that this is our home. I would have to research it, though. I don't want to speak on it if I don't know fully. But thank you for the question. And yes, NAGPRA is arduous. It's a process. We were at the field 2 days ago. And we were not allowed to see our relatives. And what I think is really ironic is they still don't understand that concept that they allowed us in a room with our spirit relatives, a drum and other items, which they think are they're animate to us. They're living, they're breathing. Yet we were not allowed with the remains of our human relatives, let's say, right? So they still don't understand that dynamic of, and these are supposed to be the experts. So yeah, we have a long way to go, but certainly that helps. Your voices do help.
Just a quick side note on that. I thank you for the incorporation of that. Just wanted to add a thing. I was living in France prior to the pandemic and a few months into it. And I was laughing on the news because France and Belgium, they were having this huge discussion about, oh, we should return stolen artifacts to Africa. That's what African countries are wanting. And it was very ironic that French officials, or a lot of French people, were like, oh, but we will protect them better than them. They're not civil enough to keep their own artifacts intact for the future people. Let us keep them instead. And I think that just shows that when, at least for Native Americans here, we're having a little bit of an easier time saying, oh, we are civil and we are equal to one another. That's the first step into going to that, again, is that equal perspective, because there are a lot of, even there, when I was living there, a lot of my, people from the France-Afrique, the other French African states, they were really mad, saying oh, how can we not be civil when they're the ones who came to stole it from us? We would have given it to some of them if they would have asked, but they just stole them from us. So how are we the uncivil ones?
Hi. Thank you. Hello? Okay, sorry. I just have a question just locally. We have the Pottawatomie State Park in Sturgeon Bay. Can you speak to just the history of having that park named after the Pottawatomies?
I read a little bit about that. I see the name had changed over time. So I'm not real familiar with the different waves of changes in that. I think that there is, and Audrey will talk a lot about this, there's a form of recognition that's not always positive or authentic. That's the word I want to use, authentic. Perhaps that is, and I don't know the date that took place where it was finally Pottawatomie Park. Being here present day, certainly I'm glad that it's there. It's a reminder. It depends on the history. What a reminder of what? Right, exactly. So it's all about perspective.
Yeah, I'll just add. What he's talking about, it's a great book to read. It's called Red Skin, White Mask. It's a play off of Black Skin, White Mask by François Fanon. But Red Skin, White Mask is a Canadian First Nations author, Glenn Coulthard. He talks about land recognition in a way of it being nice but damaging. Because if you look at Pottawatomie State Park, it's oh, it's great. It's named after our tribe. But what does it represent? Oh, it's land that's not part of our nation, and it's kind of, stolen. So, it's named after you, though. But what are we doing back for your people? Can we, give some of the funds back to your local community? Can we help this with education? They're oh, no, this is named after you. So it's kind of a reminder saying, oh, this is named, this was yours, now it's mine. It's kind of how it views with this idea of political recognition of land acknowledgement. So right. It's a wishy-washy subject for it.
We also have some questions coming from our Facebook Live.
Okay.
So I'm going to take a moment here to ask questions for the folks that are at home. Sandy Brown asks if, are there two-spirit in your tribe?
Yes. I don't want to go for it.
What was the question?
Are there two-spirit in the tribe?
Two-spirit?
Yeah.
Two-spirited people?
Yeah.
Yeah, so a two-spirit exists in, I'm sure, every Indigenous community. Does this audience know what two-spirited means? Okay. And I think generally what you might not know is they held a place of reverence in Indigenous communities because they inhabited both male and female spirits, so they were looked upon as advisors. Again, to this traditional way of life is that there wasn't just one chief, right? There was different people who came forward in different times for different specific reasons and were valued. And so certainly they were one of those individuals, and they're very near and dear to our Indigenous communities.
I mean, Is it two serious people exist, and it also goes to this idea of like play on grammar and language. I mentioned language is important, but I mean, I know today my pronouns are he, him, his, but for some reason pronouns are considered an issue for people. But in our language, Pottawatomie, when we talk about the third person, he, she, it's not specified by gender or sex. It actually just means third person, like it. You don't know the person's gender unless you know the person. So if I would say he came, or like it came to the wall, or like it came to the mall, it's like a really mean translation of it. It's not specified unless you know the person's name. Like Johnny came to the wall. Then you're like, oh, that's a male name, so that must mean that he's a male. Because our third person, which is ween, it doesn't specify it. And we actually have a story too about the coming of age of a child. Their pronouns, which would be used ween, would technically transfer into they, them, and it was to the choice of which ones they would adopt in order for their identity, whether it's he or she. That was something that sort of in the tradition it goes around, but it was kind of washed out for a while, but now it's kind of re-emerging back with the collective indigenous thought.
Hi, so my name's Helen. I'm the curator of exhibitions and collections at the Miller Art Museum in Sturgeon Bay. And so as a collection steward, I would like to make one comment about what this woman said. And as a 30-year insider on museums and working in the handling of objects of all sorts, I'm acutely aware of the very complicated position museums hold in the history of colonialism and how that museums have basically been established to legitimize white supremacy in many, many ways as the ideal interpreters of historical objects, whether they be cultural or otherwise. So, but as a curator of art, I have another question, and that is that museums are doing a lot of work with the conversations about decolonizing their impact and their position in these issues. And DEI is one of the things that we discuss across the board in the museum community. And a lot of that in museums is a very copy and paste sort of statement about our position and what that means. So as a curator, and a curator who is interested in authenticity in that, what advice do you have for me in approaching Native American artists? And what is my agenda with that? How can I, as a curator, be showcasing Native American art in a way that services both the Native American community and the non-Native communities?
Yeah, I think you have to, again, advise with those communities. I think that you have to, as you do with any advisor, value their time and their energy and reward them for their time as you would any other person. And again, it's around centering Native voices. They're the ones in the work working with their communities. They are just like Autry and I know what's impacting our community, and we can tell you very quickly. So that takes half the work out of it. It's everyone is doing the DEI thing, right? Just like everyone's doing the land acknowledgement thing. It's like this trivial act that we're all kind of going through the motions. But if we get a layer down, we can really see, like we've done today, what's underneath that. But you know, get the right people in the room with you. Yeah, and that helps. And then that shows your intention, your authenticity right there, and that you're willing to also compensate them for their time and their work.
Just to add on to that, I know it's a psychology theory, but it's a prevalent and a nuanced IR theory. It's called cognitive dissonance theory. I don't know if there's any psychologists people, but that's a great key to start, to decentralize this Eurocentric viewpoint in order to have this understanding of a good exhibition. Specifically saying is, even though I may come from this viewpoint on society and culture, and they come from a different one, I have to recognize first that mine might be different for how they understand it, but I have to try to not change it, but understand that it can be contradictory to how I would assume what is normal and not normal. And that is very important for a lot of things for how it goes.
Hi, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful presentation. You've given us a lot of information. There's so much more to learn. I wonder, because of Simon Kakwato's proximity, his gravesite here, if you could explain what you might know about how he came to live in Blackwell and in Forest County, because I know that he left Door County in 1871, the same year of the terrible fires. Door County was devastated. The forest had been cut down. But it's an interesting story of how he got there. But also, if you could mention that cabinet in Forest County Museum, which has placeholders for all of his special items, waiting for the real items to be released from Madison.
Yeah, that's true. The museum is being redone. What I think happened with Simon's story is that there was wave after wave of attempts to remove his people. I think in spirit of who Pottawatomie people are, they tried to peacefully remain in the area and behave and be diplomats as they had always served in this area, whether that was non-native to native relation or non-native to native relations, right? That's something they took very seriously. And I think that eventually it just became near impossible. And I think there was some times, it was a really tragic story. It seems like there was some times where they were able to get an ear and have good company that understood the plight of Native Americans and the Pottawatomie in this area. And but then that would be quickly taken away, right? And I'm trying to think of who says the saying, but it's a native saying, and it basically boils down to, why are you so envious of me, right? And that's what it felt like. That's what it feels a lot like, because we did know the land and we knew how to care for it, and it was easy for us to live here. And of course, if you're coming from some other place, it's difficult. And you need help and, and resources and everything. It was not possible for non-native people to exist here without native intervention. But that can create a very difficult relationship over time if it's not handled correctly, in which it hasn't been, as Autry alluded to with the fires. I think that as a peaceful person, he left to kind of maintain that in his life and probably what was sacred to him and what he was taught, his grandfather taught him. But it was never something that he put out of his mind. And so when he came back, I think he got as close as he could get. I don't know exactly how he ended up at Blackwell. I know he stayed with friends who were willing to provide for him. Like I said before, if he was able to get any physical possessions or any monetary possessions, he used it to travel to DC and Washington. And I heard he was quite, he frequented all the fairs around here. So, I mean, he was a character. He wanted to be out in his community with amongst the people. But that takes time, energy, and cost. So that's what I know about that, about Simon.
Not generally about him, but just talk about, like, in the general perspective of Pottawatomie. I mentioned there's 13 nations between Canada and the United States, all the way from between the French-speaking / Anglophone part of Canada until Oklahoma. My aunt had mentioned the Removal Act that had brought us into the Oklahoma / Kansas area that was prevalent. But I think it was the reason why the chief might have, if you look at the relevancy of what was happening to the other bands of Pottawatomie. You could look at specifically Pokagon band, which is in modern Indiana and lower Michigan. They were a tribe that actually had to give up a lot of cultural identity in order to get their status of sovereignty, which was, they were, out of all Pottawatomie, I believe they were the most Catholic out of the rest at that time period. But also with that, they had to sacrifice their sovereignty. During the termination era, they actually lost their sovereignty, and they had gotten it back in the 90s. For our tribe, our band, they wanted to keep the cultural parts relevant, and they were to flee. And I don't know if you've ever been to Crandon, but it's kind of, not desolate, but it's a little rocky. They went there to flee in order to try to conserve their parts of not being persecuted. And it wasn't until after the Citizenship Act of 1924 that we came out of hiding in 1934? Constitution? Yeah.
Well, we purchased the reservation in 1913.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, because like our reservation is one of the first ones to ever. We're the only tribe in all the United States to actually purchase our land, which is ironic. but it was a way to keep our way for our people to be in these areas without having to lose their cultural identity. And with that, you have the 24 Citizenship Act, and then within that, about 10 years after, we finally recognized ourselves as a sovereign nation in 1934 or 1932?
34.
1934 with the establishment and recognition of our first constitution. But as I say, we were the first ones to order to keep our sovereignty without having to sacrifice it, and even during the termination policy, we never lost our sovereignty.
He asked about that cabinet. Do you know about that cabinet with Donald
That cabinet?
at the museum?
No, I don't actually.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
so I know what you're talking
About, I have to ask. We have a museum director that we spoke to before coming here, and everything is being looked at and reviewed, and what we can share. So, but I have your card, and I will definitely let you know. Yes.
We've had such a great response both online and in the audience here. We're running a little short on time, so we've got one more question here in the audience and one more we're going to take online. I would encourage you, if you have any questions that haven't been answered yet, you could go to our Facebook page and post them there, and we'll do our best to accommodate getting an answer for you. Thank you again for your time.
Mine is perhaps a comment as much as a question. I look at names such as Milwaukee, Oconomowoc. I know that Milwaukee, I believe Milwaukee is the gathering of the waters. I have no idea what Oconomowoc means. Is that my problem, or how do we get all these beautiful names that are out there to be part of our knowledge, our being?
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, Manitowoc really alludes to the significance of this area, and as residents here, you should know that this is a spiritual place, regardless of who you are. This is a spiritual place. Manitowoc, Waukesha, Fox, Mequon, Feather. I mean, it goes on and on. Are you looking up this? And so this is
Remnant too.
There's relevance. For some names, as we all know, Wisconsin have native names, but they come from it. I can tell you that Milwaukee is Mnenak, which means the stolen place. Ironically, Chicago has a very close name to its original Pottawatomie name, Chicagyuk. It doesn't mean Windy City. It actually means like the skunky onion smell. But as each of them have these like relevance for native names.
I just had to give him that look. I'm from Chicago.
Okay, so last question for today, and like Carrie said, we encourage everyone to leave their questions on Facebook, and perhaps we can check them out later. But John is asking if you have a website or podcasts, books that you can recommend, so to educate people on what you spoke about today.
Yeah, so we know Clifton wrote about the Pottawatomie people. He wrote a lot about the Kansas Pottawatomie people down that way. His writings can be controversial, but I do think there's a lot of clues in there. Like with anything else, when you read something, you have to read that and something else and kind of read through what you have. If you're able to get to our museum, I don't know what they provide to the general public, but I know that they have documents there that were really valuable to me. We have a library and a museum. That would be the first place to start. But yes, there are several books.
What would you recommend?
For Pottawatomie, there's this great book by Robin Kimmerer. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass. I was gonna say, she's not from Forest County, she's from Citizens or Oklahoma, but it gives a great introduction of at least a contemporary or this general part of Pottawatomie culture, as well as ethnobotany in order how to govern the land with indigenous resources.
But if you're looking for like a historical reference, Clifton is like the Bible, they call it. And again, it can be controversial, but there's a lot of information in there.
And there's one from University of Michigan called Pottawatomie Identity. I can't remember its specific author at the moment, but as you say, I know that it's just called Pottawatomie Identity, so that's a good one. But if you want, another one. If you want Anishinaabe values, like the Three Fires Confederacy, there's a book called, I actually got the definition from that, the Bishkabiang, by Liam Bereshmawaski Simpson. It's called As We Have Always Done. That talks about a lot of cultural and social dynamics. And she also wrote another one called Dancing on the Turtle's Back. Those are really good ones as well.
Thank you. Miigwech.